Since the start of American independence, the land of the free was truly the land of undeniable hope and safety. From the War for Independence to the Mexican-American War, the United States had consistently produced success, with a constant streak of victories. Because of this, America had every right to feel confident in its military and in its people. In early 1955, the United States had become one of the most powerful global nations, forcing opposition into either stalemate or defeat. However, as 1955 came closer to November 1st, America would engage in a conflict unlike any other it had fought before. The U.S. would discover its first true defeat due to the lack of full-on commitment, lack of definite basis, and a strong sense of overconfidence. On November 1st, 1955, the United States officially started preparing military engagements against the Viet Cong and the Communist Army of Vietnam. Although the American public did not fully understand the cause for the military draft, the United States government was fixed on a lone idea: anti-communism. Although Lyndon Johnson described it as a defense of freedom, the president is justifying the reasoning for even entering a conflict based off of an idea.
At times of crisis, before asking Americans to fight and die to resist aggression in a foreign land, every American president has finally had to answer this question: is the aggression a threat not only to the immediate victim, but to the United States of America and to the peace and security of the entire world, of which we in America are a very vital part? In 1964, by a vote of 504 to 2, the United States is therefore prepared, as the President determines, to take all necessary steps, including the use of armed forces, to assist any member or protocol state of the Southeast Asia Collective Treaty requesting assistance in defense of freedom.
This reasoning led to a lack of full-on commitment by the American people. Simply put, the Vietnamese wanted to win more than the Americans did. The Vietnamese were fighting to defend their own homeland, whereas the Americans were an invading force, attempting to subjugate foreign pressures and beliefs. As the war dragged on and more casualties ensued, American interest diminished. As public support began to question why Americans were dying in a country over proving an idealistic point, commitment to the war never reached its full peak, unlike previous American supporting wars. Because of the government's reasoning in the fight for freedom, there was no real basis for the Vietnam War. South Vietnam never truly existed because it was an artificial construct created in the wake of the French loss of Indochina. Because there never was an organic nation of South Vietnam, when the U.S. discontinued investing military assets into that construct, it eventually ceased to exist. The American military still supported the protection of the non-communist people, even though more than 80% of the Vietnamese Southerners supported communism. Because of this, the war was mainly fought in southern Vietnam. It was seen primarily as proving a point against communism rather than attacking an enemy or assisting an ally. Since America had also never truly lost a war prior to Vietnam, confidence was higher than usual. Americans believed that the United States military record would justify the lack of cause or commitment. How would America lose to a weaker country when it had defeated some of the world's largest nations? This overconfidence would result in 58,000 deaths, 300,000 woundings and disabilities, and 2,000 men listed as MIA. Since America had never considered the idea of a loss, political and military strategy faltered, thinking that only more men would solve the problem. As a result, America would be more cautious moving forward in its confidence, and consider wartime a more serious affair in the future. But how did a defeat in this manner not occur sooner in American history? To analyze the differences between Vietnam and previous wars, one must contrast the success in commitment, basis, and confidence. For the purposes of this argument, a comparison will be made between Vietnam and the Revolutionary War, World Wars, and the Mexican-American War. Although the Revolutionary War was the first American war, it still resembled successful aspects and actions contrary to that in Vietnam. In terms of commitment, the 1776 Patriots were unmatched. Having pursued through years of British tyranny, a strong majority of Americans took up the idea of freedom and sovereignty. It was because of American commitment that the war even continued, seeing as it was fought by the people and for the people, and not driven by a king or a president. The basis for American independence was a solid one, a common and exact enemy, the British Empire. The Americans were not fighting against a concept such as pro-communism or anti-communism. They had a solid goal and a solid objective in mind, to obtain sovereignty and independence, and to defend and achieve freedom. In regards to the American War for Independence, there was no overconfidence. In fact, there was a lack of confidence. Lots of people thought the war was a lost cause, such as Governors William Franklin and Thomas Hutchinson, who believed the war was a desperate act that would most likely end in failure. However, because of American perseverance, supporters such as the Kingdom of France began to see the rebels as possible victors, resulting in a victory and a base of national confidence. In World War I and World War II, America showed exemplary success in suppressing the Germans. What made World War I and II so different from Vietnam was their definite and open goal. Americans were not fighting an idea or concept, but a real enemy that had affected the entire world, with threats, violence, and death, including America through the Zimmerman telegram. Although violence occurred in Vietnam and the Viet Cong were a definite enemy, there was no global-scale threat or definite attack that would transition the Vietnam War from a civil conflict to an international one. The American commitment towards the wars was mainly centered on helping its allies. American commitment grew in World War I and II because of the public hatred towards Germany and their actions globally, and the support towards the British and French, both American allies. The Zimmerman telegram also helped develop a hatred towards Germany, seeing it as a threat utilized through Mexico. In addition, World War II provided a legitimate opportunity for economic stability after the Great Depression, providing jobs benefiting both the country and the war effort. The basis for the wars was simply world versus Germany and her allies. There was no real basis for attacking communism in Vietnam. Germany and the Axis were legitimate enemies, whereas communism in Vietnam was an idea. American invasions were different from Vietnam because they were not attacking in areas held by hostile forces. Instead, the Vietnam War was an invasion onto friendly soil to simply remove the idea of communism from the Vietnamese, instead of fighting a legitimate American or Allied enemy. Vietnam was a civil war, whereas World War I and World War II were based on one's country domination over another. There was no American overconfidence in World War I or World War II because they had entered the war after larger powers had already been threatened. In World War I, the French had already fallen, and in World War II, Hitler had succeeded in acquiring numerous smaller European nations. The Americans were ultimately dragged into the war in an effort to not only protect other countries and sovereign nations, but to end German domination and the threats that accompanied them. Because Americans had to enter the war, they perceived the Germans as a legitimate international threat, and took every military step with the utmost caution, unlike in Vietnam, where victory was conceived as an easily achievable task initially. The Mexican-American War differed from Vietnam because it was truly a war to simply gain territory. Even though the ideals may sound more oppressive, the American-Mexican War achieved more popularity and results than the Vietnam War did. This is mainly because it was a war that benefited the American people directly in increasing United States borders. The goals were clearly set as opposed to the intellectual victory over a foreign system of government. Commitment in the Mexican-American War was extremely high because it directly benefited the American people. By obtaining new territories from Mexico, Americans could all support settling new lands and complete God's task, the concept of manifest destiny. There was a definite basis for the war as well, the expansion of territory. The Mexican army was a legitimate enemy, and the thing standing between Americans and their destiny was that army. There was no conflict against an idea or concept that was maybe brought up during the Vietnam War. Instead, Americans knew exactly what they were getting themselves into, and they knew exactly the basis and terms for which the war was fought: to simply gain territory. There was an essence of overconfidence, however. Because of American victories on their home soil in the past, President Polk saw this as a way to simply increase the boundaries of America's military, and the first conflict ever on foreign soil. Because this turned into a huge success, it would provide more confidence for more external international affairs in the future. Overall, Vietnam was a conflict that was individual, to say the least. Prior to 1955, Americans had known what to believe in. They had strong patriotic commitments to their country, whether it be fighting for freedom, rescuing dominated civilizations, or the expansion of the nation. Americans had directly known the benefits and results in supporting American wars, as opposed to the Vietnam War, in which people didn't know how the conflict would provide a beneficial outcome or relevancy. There was a strong base to fight on in previous wars as well, an exact threat, a common enemy. Although that common enemy or goal ranged from Germans to Mexicans, the fighting in Vietnam was against an idea, not truly against an enemy, considering the very people they claimed to have protected were mostly communist anyways. In addition, America's years and results of success before the war resulted in an overconfident move into the Vietnamese country. A combination of carelessness and built-up demeanor is what made Vietnam different compared to previous and future conflicts. There was no good intentions for sending so many troops to their deaths, only that America could continue its legacy of being large and in charge.
Hey guys, do you like garmushka?